This is my perfect victory! That's right! I win!
Mount Everest ain't got shit on me.
The cold December morning bit at Chiyo's cheeks and stung her eyes as she stepped out into the street from her home, with the door quickly snapping shut behind her. Her mother called to her from behind the door. "Chiyo, don't forget the cake. Your father is coming home early tonight especially. Make sure you get it early. Whatever you do, don't get caught up in the peak hour rush." The cake. Her father's birthday, of course. It had to be this week of all weeks. The week she and some of her classmates had been assigned to clean the school drains after lessons. She didn't dare tell her mother the reason why. She grunted back to her mother before lifting her scarf over her nose and mouth and setting off for the train station. It was a 10-minute walk to the station. However, it always felt a lot longer no matter what the weather, due to the large stairway that required ascension from the front of the apartment block to the busy streets beyond. Chiyo made it to the station just as the train was arriving. She had seemed to have managed to develop somewhat of a sixth sense with regards to when the trains would be arriving, and happily stepped into the warmth of the train car's steel shell. Her school, however, was not as luxurious. It was fully equipped with working heaters. However, the school opted not to switch them on as they were never able to secure the budget to run them. You could be sure, though, that the principal's office did not feel the pinch of the purse strings, though, and Chiyo had managed to find this out firsthand when she was brought in front of him in the week prior to explain why she had colluded with fellow students in order to cheat on a test. Chiyo was in fact innocent, but a cruel twist of fate saw the notes that were passed around end up in her hands right as the teacher looked up from her book. She had no defense. Being the child of a Japanese mother and an American father already put her in a lower class among the eyes of the purest faculty. Plus, she was an average student at best, so the need to cheat was indefensible. She was at a loss, and once the other tests had been collected, those students' papers showing the answer on the note, which was incorrect, were also to be punished in line with Chiyo. At 3 p.m. lessons were adjourned and they got to work. It was hard and filthy work. The heavy concrete drain covers had to be dragged back, and then the drain walls and floor were scraped to remove the clammy deep green muck that had been growing there over the summer. This was then shoveled into a bin to be dumped out later. From the very first cover, Chiyo and her classmates were well and truly over this laborious task, and an hour in, tempers began to flare. It was getting dark, and the cold began to numb their fingers and toes. Kasu, one of the rougher boys in the class, snapped, and he screamed at Chiyo that this was all her fault. He yelled that a pure-blood Japanese person would never have gotten them caught, so she should just do them all a favor and die. He punctuated this with a large shovel full of cold, dark scum, which exploded into her face and leached into her hair and clothes. The entire class erupted into a cacophony of laughter as she stood there in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. A feeling of pure rage overcame her and she screamed out at the entire group before turning and running off into the darkness. Kasu shouted at her repeatedly to get back to work, and that this was her fault that they were here, until she was out of sight and long gone. She ran all the way to the train station and stood on the platform, crying, not caring about the myriad of disapproving looks she was garnering from all around her. She just wanted to get home and get into a nice hot bath. People gave her a wide berth, which she thought was just great. Perhaps she would even get an entire train car to herself. Then, she remembered the cake. Her mother's words about avoiding peak hour echoed in her head. However, she had no choice. It was either return home with it, or return home without it. Ruin her father's birthday, and explain the events that contributed to the reasons why. She tidied herself up in the train station toilet as best she could, and then went to collect the cake. The cake shop owner asked her to stand outside as she went to get her the cake, Chiyo getting zero sympathy from the owner. By the time she had made her way back to the station platform, the entire area was ridiculously crowded. perfect, she thought. Of course, this day had to turn out in every way I could have possibly imagined I didn't want it to. Her fellow commuters, also tired and impatient from their own taxing time in their own small world, made it very clear to Shiho that she reeked of a foul odor and needed to keep away from them. On the platform, she was bustled around repeatedly, and she was mindful of not losing her balance or crushing the cake. It was all for naught though, for as the train approached, the crush of humans had pushed her right to the edge, and with no hands free to hold on to anything or anyone, she fell right into the path of the oncoming train. The driver slammed the brakes to full, and the tunnel was filled with the ear-piercing shriek of steel on steel as her body was barreled underneath the train and sliced in half across the torso. Everything then fell silent for Shiho. Her parents were devastated. Their only child, gone forever, and from this loss, they never truly recovered. Her school friends, however, got over the loss very quickly. In fact, not even a day had passed before jokes began to circulate about her death. Things like, she's not half the girl she used to be, and her funeral was probably 50% off. All very cruel, and all way too soon. They, however, all thought it was hilarious. Their last day on Earth, though, was spent finishing off the last of the drain cleaning before they all headed off to the station to catch the train home. They had finished quite late, and by this time the station was deserted, or so they thought. As they sat in silence, exhausted from the afternoon's labour, a chilling teke-teke sound echoed through the tunnel and made them all turn to each other in shock. "What the hell was that?" one of the boys asked. "No idea," another said. Then they heard it again. "It's coming from over there," one of the girls screamed as she pointed off into the darkness. Again, the sound became even clearer as the features of the silhouette they were fixated on slowly came into view. It was Shiho, and she was dragging herself along the ground with a huge scythe in her hands. The students tried to run, but Shiho was too fast as she launched herself at them and sliced each and every one of them in half as they screamed for their mothers to help them. It was a massacre. As they all lay there dying in a massive pool of blood, Shiho laughed and said, "So now you know how it feels to be half Japanese."